Yeah.
And so I'm really excited to talk to you because I've had a lot of great conversations, but I'm particularly excited to talk to you because of I've seen where you've come in the last couple of years. So I think there's a lot of there's a lot to jump into around that growth. Um, but maybe before we get started and get into the weeds, do you think you could give us just a little bit of your background personally, and how you got into the conservation space, leading up to the founding of Maliasili?
Yeah. Um, yeah. I mean, I guess I would say I probably got into conservation the way that a lot of um, American, European kids, kind of urban, upper middle class kids get into it in the sense of, you're interested in nature, wildlife, dinosaurs when you're five. When I was five, I
Right,
would collect, I always think in life, your horizons always expand, right? Things don't necessarily change in a way, but the things that your reference points expand. So, right, when I was five, my reference point was like my yard in
right,
suburban Washington, D.C., Maryland. And I collect insects and, had like praying mantis and things in a terrarium. And so you're interested in the natural world. And you go exploring a little bit further afield and find some actual proper forests and things. When I was a kid, I thought I wanted to work at a zoo. Like that was really fascinating, the National Zoo in Washington D.C. and the elephants and lions. That
yeah,
was super
right,
exciting to me. And then when I was 10, my grandparents took me on a cross country trip with their old trailer, and we went all the way from the East Coast to Seattle and up to Alaska and went through Yellowstone. So, again, your horizons kind of gradually expand to, when I went to Africa for the first time, which I'd always wanted to go to since seeing those elephants at the zoo when I was five, but had never actually made it there until I went after university and when my career actually started. I think
right.
the interesting thing about conservation, as you alluded to, is that it's kind of nobody knows what conservation is as a profession, right? It's a strange thing locating it as a job. Um,
Right.
and I mean, maybe I was fortunate in that I had interests and passions around nature and the natural world, but also my father, he was an economist, but he worked for the Department of the Interior, which manages all the public land. So he was involved in
Mhm.
public land management, forest, for the U.S. Forest Service management, and he had colleagues who he worked with, who were involved in like endangered species policy and at a federal government level. He later went and taught around the time I was going to university at that University of Maryland. So he knew and worked with in some form a lot of people, who worked on environmental policy, and whether they would actually call themselves conservationists or not, probably not necessarily. Um, but at least it was an entry point into kind of that space and to see what,
Mhm.
here's what a person who works on endangered species in the US does, and that's actually a
Right.
job that you can have, and that's interesting, right? um, and then people would always ask me when I was in my early 20s and was starting off in Tanzania and working in conservation in Africa. People would say, what's your background, what did you study, right? Now
Right.
I always kind of thought that was an interesting question, because on the one hand, I mean, what did I study? Like, how was I prepared for going to Tanzania? Well, I don't
Right.
really know. I mean, I, I when I went to university, I was a history major, and so that was my major. Partly because I thought maybe I would be a biology major, but I found quickly like biology was really mostly people who wanted to be doctors, and it was like kind of hard sciences, and it wasn't an expression of the interests that I had. And in fact,
Right.
there was a school of natural resources, but due to some of the structure of the university, like I couldn't major in that. So I was a history major because I mean history is interesting, and actually like it's very relevant for conservation because history is about understanding how society works and changes. And actually, in conservation, we're in the business of social change, right? We're not actually in the business of studying, you know, alligator reproduction. We can talk more.
Yeah, well, I mean, even that's quite interesting insight. A lot of
Yeah.
people would think, conservation's about studying the animals or habitat.
Right, which is of course, it's
It's part of it.
to some degree is the legacy and is the history, and you
Hmm.
have you had, of course, if you trace the history of like kind of conservation as a profession, you had biologists and a lot of
Yep.
biologists, and and then in the mid '80s, you had with the awareness of the environmental crisis and starting to understand climate change and global environmental change and risk of extinction.
Hmm.
Then you had a rise of conservation biology as a subdiscipline, as they called it, a crisis discipline. But really, conservation biology is like kind of conventional ecological research applied to conservation questions. But really,
Right.
most of it is what I would describe as problem diagnosis. So it's like, here's what habitat this species needs, or here's why this species is going extinct. And, again, there's a lot of discourse of how much conservation work, much conservation biology is like documenting extinction, right? Or it's research
Right.
that is applicable to understanding a conservation problem, like what are the
Right.
habitats that this elephant population will need in order to survive. But if you
Right.
want elephants to survive, you need to know a lot more than what habitats they need, or you need to know a lot more than why they're getting killed. Ultimately, you need to know how people are going to be willing to live alongside elephants. So again,
Right.
all
Exactly.
conservation ultimately is a human behavioral challenge. And human behavior is tied to wider forces of society. And again, this is kind of the trajectory of my career and my understanding of conservation. The conservation
Sure.
is about economics, because economics shapes human behavioral decisions and choices and land use
Hmm.
and national decisions about natural resources hugely. It's about
Yep.
politics, because politics is the means whereby different groups of people in society, whether at the national level on down to a community, or like I went to our town meeting day here in Vermont on Monday, where our town comes together to talk about our town budget and things. Right? Politics is how we make decisions as society. Right? So
Exactly.
of course,
Exactly.
politics is hugely important. Um, and it's about building organizations that can actually do things, right? So, which is about organizational behavior and change. And so, yes, in my estimation, and going back to my story, studying history has certainly been as useful to me as studying anything else. I dabbled in other things, and my background is what I would tell people when I was, again, in my early 20s in Tanzania. It's whatever I did this week. I mean, I learned something new with whatever I did this week, because I'm trying to figure out how to actually make conservation work, and I have to use all sorts of different types of knowledge to do that. And so a lot of the knowledge that I've acquired has a lot of it's been self-taught, because I need to understand how can you change how can you change institutions, how can you influence policy, how can you get people working together effectively. All of Maliasili's
Right.
work. I mean, again, when I created Maliasili, I didn't know that I was going to be creating an organization that was focused on organizational development, what we kind of in an academic or disciplinary sense call organizational development or management. I did not know that. That's what it
What,
became,
what
because we were trying
what
to
were you?
solve a particular problem.
Right. So, what was the problem you were trying to
Well,
solve when you?
again, if I'm to summarize the things that I learned in my kind of decade plus working in Tanzania, where it was about, okay, for conservation to be successful, conservation has to benefit local communities. It has to benefit the people who live alongside wildlife or live outside national parks or live around forests. And, that understanding is something that's gone mainstream in conservation in the last 30 years, right? And
Right.
Indigenous peoples movements have played a big part in that. The scholarship of Eleanor Ostrom and all of our understanding of communal property governance has played a huge part in understanding that. So that's the work that I was doing. And in doing that, I learned pretty early on that the way that work can get done and advanced and change happens is really by effective, committed local organizations and civil society. And I think one of the challenges we've seen in African conservation over many years is the dominance by people like me, in a way, right? Outsiders, people from the US and Europe, and organizations that are global in scope. That's, the origins of kind of the formal conservation movement in Africa were very much embedded and intertwined with the colonial era and the kind of the close of the colonial era in the 1950s and 1960s. And, but if you want conservation to succeed, it has to be owned and driven by local actors, national actors. It has to be embedded in the desires of people living in communities, again, alongside wildlife or with, that reflect the aspirations of civil society or business in their countries.
Right.
And I also recognized kind of early on that the local organizations, grassroots organizations, indigenous organizations, or kind of national civil society groups, if we look at African conservation, they probably get less than 10% of the resources, right? So we have a kind of a market failure, I would say, in conservation, right? The effective, impactful organizations don't tend to get the preponderance of resources. In fact, they get a great minority of resources. And we've seen a lot of kind of, again, at long last, a lot of research come out in the last few years showing, for example, how, Indigenous peoples organizations get like less than 1% of all climate financing, even though we know that Indigenous peoples and Indigenous organizations are responsible for, a great proportion of global biodiversity and, directly control at least a third of, all, high intact forest lands, and probably, have some rights of owning, manage Indigenous peoples' local communities, at least 50 to 60, 70% of the land, all the land in the world. So we have this kind of a market failure, right? So Maliasili, in a way, was a response to that market failure. Our initial inspiration, going back 13 years now, was we want to champion and support and strengthen great local organizations. That if we're going to be successful, and if community-based approaches to conservation are going to grow and address conservation challenges on a large scale, we need more great, homegrown, locally rooted organizations that are, representative of a vision of conservation that's being driven by Tanzanians and Tanzanian communities and Tanzanian civil society, and is intertwined with wider social aspirations of people. Not just, that people in New York love elephants and thinks elephants are really important and cool. That's great if we can harness those resources and that desire to support effective approaches to elephant conservation, and that is obviously where a lot of the resources in conservation come from. But we need to connect the resources with the actors on the ground who are able to actually bring about change in an effective, meaningful, and lasting way. So that was our dream. That remains our dream. But how we do that has been our journey.
So when I first started to learn about the nonprofit sector, I come from my experiences in the private sector. And so I figured that the best way to find the most exciting projects was to follow the money, follow the smart money, right? I'm used to the fact that there is smart money and there is not so smart money. And so I came across the Mulago Foundation, and I was really impressed with what they were doing. And then I came across what you were doing. And I love their model because they were talking about unrestricted funding and partnerships with organizations like yourselves. And so as part of your evolution, growth, and founding, how important was that kind of support, that unrestricted funding? Was it an important part? And I ask this because I have an agenda. I'm trying to ring the bell for that kind of financial support.
Yeah, well, so are we. We're definitely trying to ring that bell,
Right.
and we're glad that funders like Malago, who are close partners. I mean, yes, look, I think in general, it's very hard. It's 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 hard. It's not impossible, but it's very hard to successfully start an organization and get it going and go through the birthing of an organization without kind of
Yeah.
committed, flexible core support. And Maliasili only exists because again, at the very beginning, there was a group called the Acacia Conservation Fund,
Hmm.
and a philanthropist who I'd gotten to know a little bit, and that was where our first seed funding came from, and really the ability to create Maliasili came from that, and just based
Right.
on a broad idea and ambition. And I was very fortunate to have someone um, put their belief and backing to us at the beginning, and that has remained a very key partnership all the way along. And as we've gone, Malaga was another one. I mean, that was about 6 years in to Maliasili's journey, where we had gotten to the point where we had started to kind of figure out that, okay, this is what we do. And like I said, it was not a direct path at the beginning. We
Sure.
kind of we found our way to what we do, not because we said, hey, we're going to come in when this is the framework and this is what it is and this is
Sure.
exactly how we're going to do it. It was, okay, we're here to solve a problem. Well, what's the problem that we're here to solve? The problem is, how do you help really talented local African conservation, natural resource focused organizations grow and thrive and be, resilient, and to attract the resources that they need to deliver on their missions? How do you do that? What are the challenges that they face? And at first it's like, okay, well, yes, obviously they don't have the funding that they need. Everyone, of course, if you ask an organization, especially like a really local or grassroots group, what are you constrained by? What are you constrained by? Funding. But I think pretty quickly for us, we found that why doesn't an organization have money? They're doing amazing work. Why aren't they getting funding? Well, they're not communicating about their work at all. Nobody knows. Nobody's ever heard of them. They're doing amazing
Right.
work, but nobody's ever heard of them because they're not communicating, because maybe it just never occurred to them really to communicate, or how to do that, or how to package your work in a
Sure.
way that you can reach audiences overseas, who you would like to know that you exist and what you're doing and who might support you.
Right.
And then that pretty quickly, took us to, okay, well, if you're going to communicate effectively about your work and build, networks and let people know the great work you're doing in, Kenya or Tanzania or Zambia or somewhere, you need to be able to communicate about what you want to achieve and what your vision is, and what,
Hmm.
someone gives you $100,000, what are they buying into? What are they supporting?
Right.
You have to be able to articulate that. And that took us to this realm of strategic planning, right? Like, to be able to articulate the vision, and the goals of an organization and the resources they need, to
Hmm.
package your dream and your mission in that maybe locally rooted context, into a way that kind of the wider world can understand, but also that you as your team can use as kind of, here's our map and here's where we want to go and here's what we are really trying to achieve. We're clear on that. Because to be honest, most organizations are not clear on what they are trying to achieve and what their goals are and how to articulate those. And
Sure.
a lot of organizations are doing all sorts of stuff that kind of evolved organically, and may not have usually have not taken the time to say, okay, what do we really want to do? What are we really great at? What's the manifestation of our dreams and our goals and our constituents' needs in a really clear way? So these are the things that brought us to this notion of building and strengthening organizations. And again, at the first 4 or 5 years, it was mostly working on their strategy, communications, fundraising, helping them get some more core funding, unrestricted funding in those ways, which then enables them
Right.
to hire, add key capacity positions so you can actually then do more of the work and be better positioned to not be exhausted all the time, and have like, okay, we need a finance person or a communications person, or, oh, we need to invest in management because now we've grown and we're a $500,000 a year organization, and we don't actually have anyone like managing the team or pulling all the pieces together. So like that was how we kind of embarked on our path. And yeah, we met Malago in 2016, and they helped us, I think, further kind of decode a bit and ourselves articulate more crisply and clearly what we were doing.
Right.
And then, as you've noted, they provide core funding, multi-year funding, and have a terrific perspective on how they invest in their portfolio, but also are great thought partners. And we've learned, we also, we like to work with funders who we learn from and who you can talk about organizational performance with. That was something with our first seed funder, Acacia, that was so valuable too, was just sharing knowledge and ideas about high performing businesses, high performing organizations, what makes great organizations. Because that's been a lot of our journey, is just thinking about that, understanding that in the conservation space, what makes organizations. And you can read Jim Collins and read lots of business books, and again, kind of find those that are useful. And then, okay, how do you relate that to a local organization in Tanzania or Mozambique, and what's relevant to them about growing their organization? So, and yeah, I mean, one of our goals is to increase what I call kind of growth capital, right? Growth capital. We want to lower the costs of capital to our partners. And again, that's, you call it the smart money, but like we need more money that is effectively invested in conservation in a way that actually fosters growth and has lower transaction costs, because that's a huge constraint to our partners, to most organizations, is that cost of capital is enormous. I mean,
so could we talk about that a little bit? What is the transaction cost?
Well, so if you're let's say you're a local organization in Tanzania, and let's say to find out about a funder, you've got to go, let's say, on a trip of the UK and travel around, or go to the US and go to New York and host a bunch of events. And then maybe you get invited to write a proposal, and it's a $10,000 proposal, and you've got to, do 12 drafts of it, or maybe you've got to hire someone to help you write. I mean, your costs of acquiring capital can easily exceed the value of that capital. And honestly, that's not unusual in conservation. I mean, I kind of, the number of, things are improving and things are changing, and there's more large, good capital in conservation. But, this is a field that typically, or historically, a lot of the funding are like highly projectized, 1 year, $10,000,
exactly.
$20,000 grants. I mean, that doesn't really help you to build an organization. It might help. And it's, and again, it's this kind of concept that we have in conservation, that conservation gets done by like an individual. It's, again, kind of rooted back in the history of biological research. And okay, you've got an individual, you're going to give them a grant to do a project. But I mean, I really fight. We also, in our work with our partners, we push back against the centrality of projects. Like, and again, our strategic planning work is trying to move away from, okay, again, you're an organization, you start off like as one project, and then you're successful. So then you get more projects, you get more project grants. You can easily wind up with like 20 project grants for $20,000. You got a $500,000 a year budget. And how are you then charging overheads on that? Maybe a lot of funders don't even allow overheads, right? To be able to pay people to run an organization to do all these things. So again, when we do strategic planning, it's like, look, you got to get out of that framework. You got to think you're an organization with goals. If you're going to have projects, they have to fit within that overall framework. And you need to be able to articulate how all these different things fit together, because it's kind of death by 1,000 cuts if you're managing 20 small projects with no overheads, all on 1 year grants or short-term grants. But that's the conventional way of doing business and supporting conservation work, and it's
Yeah.
absurd.
I mean, 100%, I 100% agree. And that matches with what I've seen with the numerous small NGOs who not only spend a lot of energy and resources trying to raise that capital and keep their organization afloat, but it also, it not only doesn't encourage them to build out a strategy, it actually distracts them and pulls them away from their strategy, because you know what? I'm going to run out of money. I've got to take that project. It's not exactly what I want to be doing, but I have to do it because I need the money. And they just get distracted and stuck into a cycle where it's very difficult to get out. And
Yeah,
and
absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely.
and one of the things like I heard from you and in your description of how you grew was you focused on your problem, right? You were really focused on, this is the problem that I need to solve. And that is the exact way we need to be if we want to create strong strategies. So we need to be focusing on and have the space and the ability to focus on that problem and to try to find solutions for the problem, not find solutions for the next project and the next project, right? So I 100% believe that that's the way to go forward.
Yeah, and that helps you articulate your vision of impact, right? And again, Malago, as you mentioned, they really they and some of the other kind of funding partners that we've worked closely with really highlight that philanthropy and all social change work really is about achieving impact, right? What are you trying to change?
Right.
What's going to be
Right.
different in the world as a result of your work? And to be very clear about that and to articulate it clearly. And again, that's a lot of the work that we do with our partners, with their strategies, with their communications, is okay, here's what you aspire to, but what are you actually trying to change? How do you cause something to go from, okay, all the elephants are being killed here, to the elephants are not being killed and the elephant population is growing, and or community is not effectively managing or benefiting from their forest, to the community is has rights over and a management framework and is able to secure benefits that support their livelihoods from their forests. Like how are things different as a result of the work that you've done? Well, that's impact, right? And that's
Yeah,
what we're
exactly.
in this for, But again, that's not. There are a number of organizations that can be very clear about the impact that they're trying to achieve and how they do it, and to have actual evidence for it.
Mm-hmm.
Not the majority of organizations.
So one of the challenges I found with impact is, if you're doing, if you have a solution for clean water, right? Measuring the impact and the growth of your impact is fairly um, uh, fairly simple. With an organization like yourself, where you're not just doing one thing, right? You're doing a lot of things and you're working with a lot of different organizations. How do you think about impact and how do you report on and measure impact?
Yeah.
It's a little bit different.
Yeah. Well, the difference is we are a portfolio organization, right? Just like a lot of, a funder like Malago is, right? We are a
Exactly.
portfolio. We now work with 43 of what we call our partners, who are the organizations that we are providing, long-term, multi-year organizational support to. We're invested in them, in their success. Our job is to enable them to succeed. That's our mission.
Mm-hmm.
If they succeed, they're going to grow, they're going to be more effective, they're going to be able to deliver more impact. So the metrics that are meaningful for them is the way that we're able to help other organizations and the impact that they're delivering, which isn't to say that impact is our impact, but that's the impact we care about. Like at the end of the day, if we hold ourselves accountable for the organizations we support, that are we helping them? Are they becoming more effective? Are they growing? Are they delivering more impact? If all those things happen, then we're succeeding and we are contributing to their success in some way. So,
Mhm.
the metrics, the things that we measure, I mean, we measure all of those things, we evaluate those
Sure.
things, they factor in. Do our partners say that we're helping them? Well, how do they say we're helping them? What do we see changing in the organization in kind of a more qualitative sense? But are they growing? Is their budget growing? Are their teams growing? Is their reach growing in terms of the places that they're working? And and are they, in terms of the impacts and the metrics that they care about, which we often help them to develop, just in terms of here's the things that we're trying to achieve per our strategy and per our mission. Are those things increasing? And so those are the things we track, and those are the things we spend a lot of time thinking about, looking at, asking, are they meaningful? Are they telling us what we want to know? And
Yeah.
and I think we recognize, like, again, it's a choice for us. We like having a diverse portfolio. We like, we're looking for really special, talented local organizations that are doing
Right.
something important and impactful, or the potential to be really impactful in community natural resource management, conservation, and there's kind of, we think about it in terms of these foundations of effective community led conservation are having secure rights over your land and resources,
Hmm.
being able to generate benefits, which means like revenue, uh, livelihood benefits, that basically
Hmm.
your management of your resources benefits your livelihoods, it creates economic opportunities, and and to have sound management, management bodies that are overseeing and doing kind of the management at community level, right? So those are
Governance
some of
and
the
that kind of thing.
foundations. So we're looking for organizations that are really driving that forward, creating new models or growing them, or building a whole national movement of, conservancies in Kenya or Namibia, as it were. So different scales, but so some are marine organizations, some are forest focused, some are
Hmm.
rangelands focused, some are focused on community and indigenous land rights, some are focused on a particular species. So the metrics are all going to be different, and we accept that, and it's partner specific, and it's really, yeah, it's harder than if you have an investment portfolio, and you can look at the market cap or the stock price or whatever it is, and just evaluate it on simple financial metrics. It's a lot more
Yeah.
complicated in the social sector, but that's the work that we need to do, and that we need to do to help our partners be clear about what success looks like for them.
Sure. And I understand when you say that you're a portfolio organization. I was looking at your aims for 2025, and you talk about you want to increase the size of your portfolio to 90 organizations. You want to train, support 200 leaders, mobilize 40 million in new funding for partners, and then stimulate at least 100 million in new funding commitments for community-based conservation. So all of those, it seems almost like you're a fractal of Mulago, in the way that you're sort of doing what they're doing, down to the local community. So I found that quite interesting, because I wouldn't, and I'm not sure a lot of people would naturally think that is the way that's the things that a conservation organization would be thinking about. But I agree that
Well,
it's
and I should say, I mean, yeah. So think about it. If, let's say, one of our key goals is, as we put in our 2025 strategic plan, that we wanted to triple the number of organizations in our portfolio, from about 30 at the time at the end of 2021 to 90. And I mean, really, what that was a statement of, hey, we think we, at this point in time, let's say after a decade of work, we feel like what we're doing is working. We feel good about the impact that we're having on the partners we're supporting. We see a lot of additional demand for it. We see a lot of additional need, and
Mhm.
we're going to really try to be ambitious about scaling and growing our ability to work with more organizations and support them.
Right.
so that's kind of that's a marker of that, right? It's a marker
Sure.
of a certain growth ambition, which is not about growth per se. It's about being able to really be able to provide effective, meaningful support to significantly more organizations on a significantly larger scale. But at the end of the day, that is not what success looks like, right? Success, as I said, is really the growth and impact of all those organizations,
Those
which is
orgs.
not easy, and again, we have a figure of, I think, that we want our portfolio to be working across at least 75 million hectares of community land across Africa. And as, again, these are not tiny organizations working in tiny spaces. Some of them are,
Right.
membership organizations of 200 plus conservancies that are, working across 6-7 million hectares in somewhere like Kenya. But again, that's an imperfect metric too, because that kind of footprint or coverage, it means different things in different places, right? Some organizations have really a big impact in working with communities on a particular thing in one area, or maybe they do one thing really well over a fairly large area.
Right.
So it's also imperfect. At the end of the day, for us, are our partners across that portfolio, are the organizations growing? Are they achieving greater impact? And is that impact meaningful? Is it important in terms of we're seeing conservation outcomes, we're seeing livelihood outcomes, we're seeing stronger management and governance institutions at the local level. It does require unpacking and interpreting. We're doing, by the way, we've got a webinar next week around
Yeah, I saw that.
Impact Festival.
I'll
So
be
we're going
there.
to try to celebrate and document impact with some of our partners across a wider geography. And
Very good.
so I think it's work. It's work to really, as the portfolio grows, to really distill and draw out that impact.
Yeah.
The
No,
financial ones are easier. They're easier as metrics, right? Okay, we're going to mobilize more money, and we're going to get more money flowing to our partners. That's an easier thing to track, and it has a meaning in and of itself. Of course, it's also only meaningful if you're mobilizing funding for organizations that are delivering impact and that are growing.
Sure. And I've seen. I was looking at your team before, and I can see like your team has significantly grown since the last time we spoke. And I'd like to talk about actually how you've made the decisions about how you've structured your team and grown your team. But just before we get into that, one last thing I wanted to ask about the leaders that you identify and the partnerships you create. You mention often, finding excellent leaders. How do you think about what is an excellent leader, and how do you identify that?
Yeah. So, well, let me again. I'll take a step back and just talk a little bit about
Sure.
the evolution of our leadership, of like the work we do in leadership. So,
Thanks.
around the same time as I described, let's say like 5 years in, when we kind of gotten to this, I would call it through our prototyping phase. Like we'd worked with kind of an initial group of 7 or 8 organizations in East Africa. We'd done enough work on their organizational development to see that, okay, we're kind of onto something. We're seeing them grow. We're seeing them get traction. We're seeing them get better at what they're doing. And that kind of led us to kind of a growth point. We met Malago. We developed a number of other key funding partnerships around that time. Another thing we did was, as we were seeing that momentum start to build, we said, we really need these organizations to be talking to each other. Like we need them to be solving their own problems. And we recognized that a few things about the leaders of the organizations we were working with. First of all, and this is a big thing across the whole conservation field, which I think we increasingly recognize, is that the people who become leaders of really important organizations, they didn't necessarily know that that's what they were going to do. Like their leadership role as it evolves is a function of doing effective conservation work. It's, you had a good idea to solve a problem, it delivered some results, therefore you got more money, so you started doing more of it, therefore
Right.
you got more demand, someone provided you some more money, and
Yep.
okay, you wake up 10 years later and you're running an organization with a $500,000 budget and a staff of 30, and you're like, you were a, lion researcher, or you were a, community activist. And this is probably the same in business, but I think the difference in
Sure.
business of someone who's kind of a startup founder, who again may find themselves 10 years down the line with a team of hundreds and a $500 million company or something, is you have much more of a support network there, right? You have investors, when you have venture capital investors, private equity investors who are in the business also of supporting or mentoring or giving advice. I think leadership in conservation is more lonely and more isolating, and there
Sure.
can be a lot of
Sure. No doubt.
competition. There can be a lot of really unhealthy dynamics and competition between big groups and small groups. So, like
Sure.
the support ecosystem in conservation for organizational leadership is not great, and we definitely saw this with our partners. And people say leadership is lonely, right? So we want to, but we also recognize, okay, we're working on strategy, we're working on communications, we're working on fundraising and some recruiting and stuff. But we need to really invest in these leaders because they're key. At the end of the day, if you're the leader of a small growing organization, that individual, the choices they make, the approach they bring to leading and growing their team is really, really important. And we felt we
Yep.
weren't doing that at that stage. We weren't focused on the individual. So we piloted a leadership program, working with the Nature Conservancy, which provided kind of the seed support for that initiative, and was supporting some of the same groups like in Kenya that we were working with at that time. We piloted it. It's grown. Now I think we probably run about a dozen or so leadership programs, and adapted it to different contexts. We've run one in Madagascar. We're running one in the Congo Basin in collaboration with a peer organization called Well Grounded now. And so, it's not like we look for leaders who have it all figured out, right? I mean, but what do
Yeah.
you really want to
Right.
look for in when we're selecting our partners? I mean, we're looking for commitment. We're looking obviously
Hmm.
for real passion for impact and for results. Critical, and I think this has been something we've really learned a lot about in terms of it being a key to our ability to be effective, is you have to work with leaders who are willing to be self-critical, who are humble,
Sure.
who are going to be reflective, and who want to get better. I mean, if an organization doesn't want to grow and get better and change, and if a leader isn't prepared for their role and their centrality in the organization to evolve and change over time, then you're not going to be successful. I mean,
Yep.
I mean, we were just talking this morning with our team about the importance of humility. I mean, again, like Jim Collins and Good to Great talks about this in terms of
Right.
the best
Exactly.
businesses in the world, that the best leaders are not the kind of the heroic, out there, kind of egomaniacal figures who maybe you see on the cover of their memoirs, but they're very self-effacing, humble, very
Hmm.
team focused. You're an enabler of team, if you want to be an effective leader and you want to grow a great organization. And so that's something we've really come to appreciate more, and in thinking about the leaders who we want to work with, who we're going to be effective working with, and who
Yep.
ultimately are going to be the ones who are positioned to grow great organizations.
No, that's great, and thanks for uh, clarifying that. So I want to switch gears a little bit
Sure.
to talk about the growth and how you've grown, because I think it's quite interesting. You've significantly grown the team since we've last spoken. So at some point a few years ago, you decided you needed to expand what you were doing, and it appears to me, and I'm only looking at the surface level, you have a core team, um, a core Western team, but the majority of your team is regionally focused across all of the different regional zones that you're focused on, and I would say the large majority of your team is locally based. Is that correct? And if so, like, how did you get to that stage? How did you think that through?
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, it's really been an evolution for us. And I think for many years, and yeah, I created Maliasili, right, when I was moving from living in East Africa to then moving back to Vermont and building it out from here. And in our first few years, we kind of cobbled things together, and people were, I mean, we've always been a remote team. So that's,
Right,
the managing through the pandemic was maybe easier for us in that sense. We've always been a remote
right.
team. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but, over time, really ensuring that we grow our team in a way that we're able to provide progressively better support to our partners over a growing geographic area. So, and again, now we've got 43 partners in 12 countries. I think, and we'll probably be 15 or 16 countries by this time next year.
Mm-hmm.
And uh, so, growing the team in region, and you know, around kind of early, well, about midway, let's say about midway through, and again, similar timing as some of the other inflection points I described, let's say around 2016, 2017,
Sure.
um, we 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 added a longtime close colleague of mine, Elizabeth Singleton, stepped into the chief operating officer role. So yeah, she was also, like me, based in the US, and really put a lot of the focus into growing the team and growing the systems and positioning us for growth. And then, and our senior management team has grown. The majority of that is based in Africa. Um, our CFO is in the US. So the structure and our leadership team has grown. The regional distribution has changed a lot, and yeah, our overall staffing and the growth of our in-country teams has been really critical. And you see, like now we have a team of three in Madagascar, and
Mm-hmm.
they're almost they're the leaders of that work. They're the strategic
Right.
designers of it, and selecting the partners, and doing a lot more as well to build partnerships and raise funding, and run our leadership program there. So I think that's a good model for growth. I think last year we went through an organizational restructure. And we put it as a priority in our strategic plan, going back uh, 3 years now, to really put more of the organization's leadership in Africa closer to
Mm-hmm.
our partners. And so the COO role shifted to Jenga Kahiro now, who was previously our East Africa portfolio director, is in the COO role. Um,
Right.
and
Okay.
again, the executive team has shifted a bit more to uh, geographically balanced, and having me in the CEO role and the COO now in Africa. And uh,
So from a perspective,
overall, I would say a key thing is the deliberate investment in strengthening and supporting and growing a primarily uh, African team, in-country team that is proximate to our partners, has been a top priority for many years. And I think we have made a lot of progress. I mean, one of the most exciting and gratifying things for me, it's not just the growth, but it's the growth of the talent and capabilities and diversity of our team, and to see, future leaders stepping in and doing more. And that's something we want to foster. And, speaks to my point about what we want to see in our partners. Well, it's the same thing for us too, right? I mean,
right?
my job is to support the growth of a team that is more diverse and is representative of our partners and the work that we do with them, and
Hmm.
is really you know able to provide that kind of support and grow the organization and assume greater leadership over time.
And it really sort of shows the dedication you have and the focus you have to solve the problem that you guys are really trying to address. I did have a question though. Let's say you're going to turn on, because my impression was that it's very horizontal organization in terms of every country. There's two or three people in each country, but is there also sort of a level of hierarchy above that? So different regions.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, we have a pretty normal, I would say, hierarchical structure in the sense
Right.
of,
Okay.
we have 6 or 7 different tiers, and and again, we've reorganized things a bit in the last year, where you've got, so in countries, you've got kind of either a senior manager or a deputy director, and then we've got a chief of the overall portfolio, chief operating
Right.
officer. We've got a 4-person executive team and a larger senior management team, and now also kind of a team of now this deputy director role that we've created. So it's it's a balance, right? And that's something we struggle with and think about, and have changed a bit in our structure in terms of balancing the hierarchy that you need for accountability for effective management, because we also
Hmm.
believe, and
Right.
some of our, I think a lot of the members of our organizational leadership have really championed the importance of strong management, right? And
Sure.
the role of management in developing individuals and developing talent. So having strong line management, having strong management within a smaller team within the organization,
Hmm.
is really important, and balancing the kind of that hierarchical structure with an organization that really thrives on teamwork. And
Hmm.
again, we have to be a team of creative problem solvers and people who are good at working independently. Like I said, we've always been remote, although we do have quite a large kind of cluster of different team members in Kenya now. Probably almost half the organization is based in Kenya, and that's a balance, and
Yeah.
something we're
Sure.
always trying to kind of fine tune it.
And the reason why I ask specifics about the way you think about structuring your organization and growing the organization is I'm interested to understand how you think about scaling. Um, and so I would love to
Hmm.
dive into that. But one thing I wanted to touch on before we go there, I read a post that you wrote or an article that you wrote, um, talking about the founder's dilemma.
Hmm.
Um,
An
in
old an
that,
old blog post, yeah.
yes, right. But the summary of the article was, if at some stage you get to the point where, as a founder, you get kicked out of the organization because the organization's outgrown you, then effectively maybe you've done your job. And I thought that was actually quite an interesting and refreshing perspective, because it's nice to think, you know, what we're in this game for is to solve problems, right? At the end of the day, and not to just keep ourselves employed, right? And so I really like that approach. Could you maybe just sort of, I don't know if your thinking has evolved from there, and now you want to stay as the king of it all, but
No, I mean, I think, again, I think the hallmark, and we did a fun webinar in October on organizational growth and succession and transitions. And again, we often talk about in our field of like succession planning, right? But I think succession planning, again, like the is maybe the way it's like there's this plan, like, okay, I'm going to hand over to so and so, right? But in reality, succession planning and growth, they're all intertwined, because really it's about
right,
you're building a team of leaders such that the role of the kind of the founder, or the maybe this an individual who was central, or a pair, or a founding group, or whatever, it becomes progressively reduced over time. I mean, that's
right,
what you want to see. And as
yeah,
others grow,
exactly,
and that they get the support, but also the space to exercise leadership, such that that's the pathway to preparing an organization for succession, for transitions, for growth, for change. And I think that's the outlook that all leaders should take, and is really the key to building an enduring organization. And and it's I mean, there are challenges, right? I mean,
Sure.
in that, and in business too, right? But to build an enduring organization, that's what you have to do. Ultimately, you have to intentionally work to decouple the organization from the identity and the role of the founder. And that means taking an intentional approach to growing, strengthening a team, to decentralizing authority, responsibilities over time, and probably taking courageous decisions at some point or another. But I think that's the first step is having that be the framework around leadership and growth that one brings to the role.
Yeah.
Doing it, again, we were just talking this morning about organizational culture. And, again, I think we see so much in conservation is that the leader founder's identity as a human being is interwoven with the identity of the organization. And
Oh,
that's
100%.
dangerous. That's dangerous, right?
Yep.
So you have to be self-aware of your ego, which is, again, something that people don't always do well, especially in this
Sure.
field. Or it can be hard, right? Because people make huge sacrifices. That's the
Yeah,
thing, is
exactly.
the founders. You can say, oh well, a founder is holding on, or a founder doesn't is their ego is totally interwoven with the organization. But the founders make big sacrifices to get an organization to the point where it can be successful and where it can grow. And
Right.
it's also true. A reality is that in a lot of, especially in Africa um, and in the field writ large, right, is like, what's the kind of the personal asset base and safety net from a field where you're often scraping by or bootstrapping. Like a lot of, so it's definitely the case that a lot of leaders or founders stay in the role because they don't have a great economic alternative to step out and do something else. And again,
Right.
that's an important role of the board of an organization too, to see, to position the organization so that's not the case.
Right.
Um, and so that, but also, like, the leader has to be thinking about their professional development as well, like that,
Yeah.
that they're proactively thinking about how they are trying to grow in their career, and not just sit in that seat and hold that space and be there forever.
Yeah. No, and I think that's a good segue. I'm sort of working towards wrapping up this discussion, but I'm really fascinated based on that. Where do you see Maliasili in the next 5 to 10 years? Do you have a grand vision for where you want to take it, or
Well, I mean, I think we, again, writ large, our job is to help as many great local organizations as we can. I think
Mhm.
I think I think we continue to deepen a sense that, I mean, again, to position ourselves, as we always do with our partners, in the wider field. There's some big things that have happened in the conservation field the last 3 or 4 years, that are very relevant to our work. They're relevant to my career. We've
Mhm.
seen community-based conservation and the role of Indigenous people and the
Oh,
role of local institutions really go mainstream. We've also
100%.
seen the climate and conservation agendas really converge around the importance of natural resources, nature stewardship, conservation in a significant way, which is bringing more funding and more resources into the cause, which is great.
Right.
Um, as these things are happening, and we're also seeing this emphasis and recognition on the importance of local organizations and getting funding to the front line and getting investment down to local groups, and decolonizing conservation and
Yep. Yep.
really strengthening, empowering local organizations. And that's great. I mean, that's what we've always believed in and worked towards, and so we're thrilled, and
Yeah.
we see a lot of opportunity for that, and for our role in shaping better partnerships between international and local organizations, working to really significantly shift funding flows to I mean, this year we're talking a lot about going from pledges to practice, right? We've seen great pledges the last few years around, supporting local organizations, funding indigenous and local organizations and community-led conservation, but actually shifting practice is not keeping up with that, right? And there's a number of studies and updates and that have highlighted that. So how do we really work within the system to grow more, funding practices that, again, reduce the cost of capital and make that growth capital more accessible and impactful for larger numbers of local organizations. So there is a lot of momentum, and again, we're seeing a lot of interest, and I think kind of emerging desire to invest more in organizational development, leadership development. Again, the things that will support strengthening local organizations, including so that they can absorb more financing over time.
Right.
And I think we feel we have developed a really, at this point, and as we're not a small organization anymore, and as we've run, many iterations of leadership programs and probably done, 40 or 50 strategic plans in the last 5 or 6 years for all sorts of different organizations, our methods and our tools and our offer is fairly distinctive. So we, and we get a lot of requests, and we get a lot more requests from places where we're already working. And we get a lot of requests and interest from organizations that, we understand, like a local organization in the Philippines or somewhere where, we get it. We get the challenges you're facing and all the things that we're familiar with from our partners. But, how do we help you? How do we do that? So I think that's that question of wider geographies. I mean, we're scoping, again, we're doing a leadership program with a collaborating partner in Congo Basin countries. We did some exploratory work in West Africa last year, so I think that will continue to develop. We'll deepen our number of partners we have in places like, maybe Zimbabwe or Mozambique or Madagascar, where we've been investing a bit more. And then we have some interesting questions to explore. I mean, to your question around scaling, right? And I think that's something we've thought about for a long time, even as we've been growing within Africa and increasing our portfolio and increasing and deepening kind of the way that we do our work and our internal capacity to provide kind of a comprehensive suite of services. So we're taking a closer look at that this year. And I think, next year we're going to do a new strategic plan, probably looking at where we want to be in 2030. But I think, at the end of the day, it's how, and we're always running, I think, and this is something we've always done from the beginning at Maliasili, I think is an important part of our culture. I always talk about running deliberate experiments. It's like, okay,
sure,
we want to, like, again, Congo Basin, we see there's, it's clearly an important region. We're trialing a collaboration with these colleagues, well-grounded, who we've known for a long time. We're working together. We're piloting a leadership program. We're learning from it. We're learning how we work together. We're learning more about the region and how the partners expand, and trying to verify, can we contribute? I think always trying to take a self-critical look at, we think we have something to contribute, but let's verify it, right? Let's do a piece of work with an organization here, or trial a partnership and see what we learn and see what it tells us then about kind of refining our way of growing and scaling in a particular place. And I think figuring out how do we help other organizations that want to help local organizations to kind of draw from our toolbox and our methods to help some of their partners is an interesting question that we're nosing around this year.
So I wanted to ask you, from a personal perspective, how about the future of Fred Nelson? And is it intrinsically tied with Maliasili? but my feeling is, just from hearing you talk about it, is that you're still completely passionately engaged with the problem that you're trying to solve, and in fact that there's almost, there's plenty there to keep you going. Am I reading that correctly?
I think you're reading it correctly. I also think, I mean, again, I think it's important to always keep an open mind, right? Not lock yourself
Right, of
into
course.
the
Sure.
space that you're in or the thing that you're doing. Keep that open mind. Be be open to the possibility of your progressive redundancy, right?
Right.
But also don't force it, right? Don't force things, right?
Sure.
And have people on your board and as advisors or coaches or whatever, or teammates who are going to be honest with you about where, how your energies are being maximized. I also do think that, um, we Maliasili is a fun organization to work for. I say that as an
Yeah.
employee, right? Like,
Sure.
we're a team that has a really strong culture of teamwork, of of also having fun, and again, we were reflecting on our organizational culture this morning, and again, all credit to our leadership team and to our board members and everyone um, who's been on the journey from our early days in growing the organization and developing that culture, because yeah, it is what makes it rewarding, makes it fun, um, and yeah, and like I said, we've just gone through kind of a significant organizational restructure, so have a lot of team members who are settling into new roles and growth roles and new leadership within the organization. So I think right now I'm probably focused on that process, where that's going to take us this year, um,
Yeah.
and also thinking about our strategic plan, uh, for the next 5 years or so, and what that's going to look like, and how we develop that, and how we kind of distill all the learning and growth that we've had over these last 4 years, 8 years, 13 years. You know, and that in and of itself will give me some new data about whatever my future looks like too.
Sure. So I want to be conscious of your time. You've been very generous, but I just want to ask you one last question. Looking back on your journey so far, um, what is something that you know now that you wish you'd known when you started, or advice that you would have given yourself when you started?
I mean, I think a few things that I've learned again from really key teammates and board members, and um, has been, I think, the importance of taking an intentional approach to building organizational culture,
Mm-hmm.
demystifying it. And again, we were just talking this morning as a team about like culture and values, and reflecting on some of our other early kind of or early founding and key members of our leadership of the organization. Really, I think, saw the importance of codifying our values, right, as they were emerging. I didn't really see that early on, but now, I mean, I'm really, I see the importance of it now as we grow and as people come into the organization, of
Right.
really being clear of your values and having kind of a values driven leadership approach, and revisiting those values and using those as a compass. I mean, those become really important as you grow. You don't appreciate it when you're a team of 5, but when you become
Yeah.
a team of 50, it becomes really, really, and I see the way that our team members embrace those and lean into them and internalize them. And it's like, wow, this is
Yeah.
powerful and important. And I also think really valorizing management and the investment that we've made in management. Again, I learned a lot from my COO for many years, Elizabeth Singleton, around the importance of management and
Hmm.
really developing processes and a culture of management, which again, I wouldn't have done that. I mean, I think I'm still learning to strengthen my culture of management, and maybe adapt it for the growth of the organization. But I really come to appreciate that. And again, it gives us also such a rich, we always do with our partners things that we also do to ourselves. That's how we learn. Like, that's how we learn that something's important. It's like, okay,
Yeah,
we're going
for
to
sure.
refine our performance management system. Oh, this is working now. Okay, let's go bring that to a partner and say, here's how you can design and implement a simple and useful and appropriate performance management system.
Yeah, exactly.
That's how
Makes
you
sense.
learn how to help
Right.
organizations. And actually, I think that's a big picture important thing about Maliasili's work that we've come to recognize is like, we're able to help our partners, I think, because we are people in our team who have grown organizations from zero to XI. I mean, I've been involved in a number of different organizations in Africa or different places and
Yeah.
helping them get off the ground and grow. And we have board members and team members who've grown or led or managed other organizations in different places. That's really important, to have had the experience as an entrepreneur, as someone,
100%.
who faces all the same challenges. And, I think not everyone who does capacity building work or works as a consultant has had that experience.
Right.
It's important. It's a really important one.
Yeah. No, that's a good point to wrap things up. Um, Fred, it's been a pleasure to speak with you. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I congratulate you on all your success and the organization you've built, and also the way that you've done it. I think I think your story is really a shining light of inspiration, and yeah, I, I hope that it continues, and I'd love to continue our conversation, if that would be okay with you.
Absolutely.
Thanks
Yeah.
very much,
Thanks.
Fred.
I appreciate it, and great to talk and share some of these reflections.